Hey guys, this is Dave with Gizaudio, and we're going to be taking a look at this, the S.M.S.L Raw Pro-DAC 1, which is their newest DAC from their Raw lineup. It is a dedicated standalone DAC, so it does require a separate amplifier. And not too long ago, I reviewed their Raw MDA 1, which is a DAC amp combo, and it was actually one of my top value picks because for its $279 asking price, it brought a lot to the table. So now we have the Raw Pro-DAC 1, which isn't necessarily shooting for versatility and value like the MDA 1. This is obviously more focused on using higher end internal components and whose engineering is more focused on delivering a more refined audio signal to a standalone external amplifier. Subsequently, you are going to be jumping up in price. But this being just a standalone DAC at this price, what kind of value proposition can you expect? And what kind of performance and features can you expect? Well, those are the questions I'm hoping to answer in today's video. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. Now, as far as what's included in the box, you get this remote. You also get two different USB cables, a type A to B, then a type A to C, and then they've also included a power cable, which I've got plugged in, and then a Bluetooth antenna, which I also have attached to the back. Now, they've priced the Raw Pro-DAC 1 at $699, so it's definitely one of S.M.S.L's higher priced devices. I know they also do have the D400ES, which I think is $799, and then the SUX, which is $999. On the front of the device is a multi-function volume wheel that also functions as a power button and a selector button when you're scrolling through the internal menu. There is a small color display and you have a couple of different UI styles to choose from. The graphics option looks nice, but the text is much larger and is displayed a little clearer in universal mode. Of course, the internal menu gives you access to all of your basic settings like input and output selection, brightness, language, etc. But it also gives you access to some additional sound options like PCM and DSD filters, and also some sound color options as well. In the back of the unit, we have our RCA and XLR analog outputs. The RCAs provide 2.5 volts RMS of level output, while the XLRs provide 5.2 volts of level output. And both sets of outputs can be set to either fixed or variable. So you can use the Raw Pro-DAC 1 as a DAC or a passive preamp. And then there are several digital input options, including an AES EBU input, an I2S input, a Bluetooth antenna connector, a coaxial SPDIF, Type C and Type B USB inputs, a power cable input, and then the main power switch. So in terms of connectivity, you do have a lot of options. On the inside, it uses a single ES9039MS Pro DAC chip, similar to the D400ES and the SUX, but the SUX does use dual chips. The digital inputs also use the same third generation XMOS XU316 chip. So there isn't really anything new, at least in terms of the chips they've used with this device. That said, they are great chips, and depending on which input you use, this device can decode all of your higher bitrate formats if you are using the USB inputs or I2S input. It will support up to 32-bit 768 and DSD512. And then with the coaxial, optical, and AES EBU inputs, it will support up to 24-bit PCM or DSD64 over PCM, which is a little unusual. As far as Bluetooth formats, it supports SBC, AAC aptics, aptics HD, and LDAC. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to sound. So I tested this in a couple of different scenarios, of course, as a desktop device with different headphone amplifiers, but also with my two different home audio systems. So here in my office / studios with my speakers, and then also with my main living room system. And it did work very well with my home audio system, but of course the device is primarily designed for desktop usage, and that is of course the main focus of this channel. So that's what I'm primarily going to focus this review around. Now, some of my equipment that I used with my desktop setup was the FiiO K9 Pro, AUN S17 Pro, and then I also paired it with the X-Duo TA32 and quite a few other headphone amplifiers. Now, before I start, I need to preface this by stating that every component in your chain plays a role in determining the overall quality and the overall level of your listening experience. But ultimately, the level of performance of those components are only going to be as good as your IEMs, headphones, or speakers. So when you hear me talking about detail retrieval, bass speed, soundstage width, imaging, layering, and all of those buzzwords that you typically associate with technical performance, if your IEMs, headphones, or speakers do not have good technical performance, then it doesn't matter how good the other components are, because that's the last thing the audio signal passes through before it reaches your eardrums. And as far as the filters and the sound color profiles, I did run through all of those in my testing. And while I did hear some differences, most of my listening impressions are with the device in stock mode. So it was with the minimum phase filter, and then the sound color profiles were disabled. So how does it sound? Well, in terms of its general presentation, it's excellent. It's transparent, it's linear, but it's not bright or clinical. I didn't hear anything that some might refer to as saber glare. It also had excellent treble extension, so all of the air and the micro nuances were represented if they were present in the recording. Everything in the upper frequencies simply sounded accurate and just generally correct. And it doesn't lean the opposite direction either. There is no obvious coloration in the bass or mid bass, so there's no warmth. However, while I wouldn't necessarily categorize this as lean or thin, I did find my attention at times being drawn to the upper half of its presentation. And I need to reiterate, this is not what I would consider as leaning bright. However, the attributes that kind of jumped out at me initially, speed, precision, detail retrieval, all of these attributes were present in every part of its presentation, from the lowest frequencies to the highest. But looking at the bottom half of its presentation, the bass was fast, it was snappy, dynamic. Again, the extension was excellent. I was able to hear all of the bass texture, all of the physicality and the weight. It was just all there. The mid-range was clear, it was natural, it was detailed, uncolored, and that carried through into the treble as well. Again, also very detailed. All of the micro details were present. It was resolving, it was airy. And again, as you step back and you look at the presentation on the whole, I didn't pick up on any excessive coloration or anything that would negatively impact or influence the overall sound presentation of whatever amplifier it was feeding the signal into. It was about as transparent, linear, and resolving as any DAC I've heard under about $1,000, easily competing with some of the best, like topping D93 Discrete, Centaurus, Matrix Mini i4, which is actually a DAC and a streamer, but it's a great DAC. And if I'm being honest, even when I was comparing this to my Matrix Element M2, which cost a lot more money, and I have used in both scenarios, I used it in my desktop setup, but it's currently being used in my home audio system, I really had to struggle to hear any significant differences between the raw Pro-DAC 1 and the Element M2. There was maybe a small amount of extra detail in the M2's presentation, but I really, again, I had to struggle to hear those differences. And I can't really compare this with the Goose.R26 because, of course, that's an R2R DAC and their presentations are just so different. But generally speaking, based on my experience, I think I can feel pretty confident in saying that at a minimum, the raw Pro-DAC 1 is very competent and very competitive for this price point. And I think I can also confidently say if you are trying to find a DAC that is significantly better than this DAC, then you're probably going to have to spend a significantly larger amount of money to achieve that. Now I need to kind of pick things up a little bit, but I do want to talk about some pairings and also share some of my favorite pairings. So as I had mentioned earlier, I paired the raw Pro-DAC 1 with several amplifiers, but my favorite pairing without a doubt was with the AUN S17 Pro. And I think for me personally, again, just with my usage with this, I found that while I wouldn't necessarily consider this to have a bright signature, it's very linear. So when I paired it with linear amplifiers, it could start to sound a little clinical. But when I paired it with something like the S17 Pro, again, it does have a little bit of coloration, then it allowed all of those beautiful warm and those rich tonal characteristics of the S17 Pro to shine through while still giving me very high levels of detail and also giving me a nice wide open soundstage. And it also paired really nicely with tube amps as well. So my recommendation is to, if possible, try pairing this with a good Class A amplifier or tube amplifier. Now, as far as noise, it has a low noise power supply, so it's very quiet, and you can rest assured that it will not introduce any noise into your chain. But to wrap things up, as I had mentioned, in terms of value and just its general performance, in my experience, there are very few DACs that I have heard at this price point that can outperform this. And if you wanted to find a DAC that is going to outperform this significantly, you will likely have to spend over $1,000. But I guess the question is, who is this for? Well, if you are looking for a standalone desktop DAC in this price range and something that is exceptionally transparent and uncolored, that will allow your amplifier's individual attributes to shine, and if you tend to maybe consider yourself to be more of a purist, then in my opinion, this is probably going to be a good fit for you. This is an exceptionally good standalone desktop DAC in my opinion. So that concludes my review of the S.M.S.L Raw Pro-DAC 1. If you're new to the Gazaudio channel and you like our videos, please take a minute and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to go a step further, you can also support us through our Patreon. I'll be sure and leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this review. Please comment on this review. Please like this video. Please share this video. I hope you have an awesome day.